So we'll throw the full force of the law at offenders, whether that's charging people with assaults, violent disorder, riot, and if terrorism offences are appropriate, I know the Director of Public Prosecutions has said he's prepared to consider that. We will throw the full force of the law at people. And whether you're in this country committing crimes on the streets or committing crimes from further afield online, we will come after you. Being a keyboard warrior does not make you safe from the law. You can be guilty of offences of incitement, of stirring up racial hatred. There are numerous terrorist offences regarding the sort of publishing of material. All of those offences are in play if people are provoking hatred and violence on the streets, and we will come after those individuals just as we will physically confront on the streets the thugs and the obs who are causing the problems for communities. But if you're a keyboard warrior, you're not safe from the law if you incite violence.
In Russia last year, 400 people were arrested for things that they said on social media. 400 people in Russia. Obviously, this country is very different. How many people do you think were arrested in Britain for things they said on social media last year?
Go on.
Take a guess.
I've no idea.
3,300.
Really? Arrested for what they'd said on social media?
Yeah.
Really? What sort of things get you
Well,
arrested?
one example I give in my show is there was a young woman from Liverpool called Chelsea Russell, and people can look this up. Her friend was killed in a car crash, a 19-year-old woman, and she posted the lyrics of his favorite song on her Instagram, the lyrics. And there was a rap song, so the lyrics contained several instances of the N-word. Okay? She was arrested, prosecuted, found guilty, given 500 hours of community service and a fine, tagged, and for a year she was under 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. curfew.
My goodness.
In Britain.
In Britain.
In 2018.
But you're telling me now that 3,500 people were visited by the police?
No, far more were visited by the police. Far more. There are cases just half a year ago, and I defended Jo Brand, a British comedian, over this. She made some comments, which, you know, it wasn't a great joke, but she talked about this during this milkshaking episodes where people were having milkshake thrown at them. She said that, well, if I was doing it, I'd throw some acid over them, right? That's not a great joke, but she got a visit from the police on the basis that she was, quote, inciting violence. And they eventually decided not to proceed with prosecution. But it was obviously a joke. She's a comedian. She was on a comedy program. The context is very clear, right? The defining case actually in recent British history on this was the Count Dankula incident. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
No.
This is a Scottish YouTuber who made. Okay, so this is quite an interesting one to explain. His girlfriend had a pug dog. You know those little ugly dogs.
Yeah, yeah.
And she thought it was the cutest thing in the world. Yeah. And he wanted to annoy her for a prank. So he trained the dog to be the most horrific thing that he could think of, which in this case was a Nazi. So he trained this dog to do a Nazi salute, right? He posted it on YouTube to his 3 subscribers at the time. And overnight, the video went completely viral. 3 million views in like a week. He was arrested, convicted, found guilty, fined £800. And he is, to this day...
What precisely was the charge?
It was grossly offensive. He was being grossly offensive. That's the correct legal terminology. And he, to this day, is a hate criminal. When the papers write about him, they're legally allowed to call him a Nazi hate criminal.
Wow.
That is where we are. And it really started with that. I talk about all of these things in my show, where we are now in a position where, in that court case, the prosecutor argued that context and intent are irrelevant. And the judge accepted this.
Really?
So even by retelling the story to you now, I am potentially engaging in grossly offensive behavior. Context and intent, according to these people, are irrelevant. Now, get your mind around that and think about the potential implications of that. I was having dinner with a friend from Saudi Arabia about this, and I told her, and she couldn't believe it. You know, so what does that say about us? Do you know what I mean? And she was like, really, in Britain? But isn't this a free country? That is where we are. And that's why, as I say, we have to push back against it and go back to what are fundamental values as a civilization, John? What are they? Freedom of speech, freedom of association, as you said, right? And respect for the individual and the rights of the individual. That's not to say that community isn't important, but there's a level of rights that we all have.
Legal experts have pointed out that attempting to extradite individuals from another country for expressing their views online could set a dangerous precedent, potentially leading to a chilling effect on free speech worldwide. Furthermore, the implications for international relations are significant, as this stance could strain diplomatic ties between the UK and the US, with some fearing that it might lead to retaliatory actions or a breakdown in cooperation on other matters of mutual concern. The announcement has also ignited a broader debate about the limits of governmental authority in the digital age, where the internet blurs the lines of national borders and traditional legal jurisdictions. Many are concerned about the potential for abuse of power if governments begin to assert control over individuals in other countries based solely on their online activities. Human rights organizations have expressed alarm at the possible erosion of individual rights, emphasizing that the threat of extradition could be used to silence dissent and stifle free expression, particularly when it comes to politically sensitive topics. In response to the growing backlash, some have called for clearer international guidelines on how such cases should be handled to ensure that the rights of individuals are protected while also addressing legitimate concerns about incitement and violence online.
Hello, Oxford Union. Here I am, right back where I started from 50 years ago. And do you know what the subject of my first paper speech was? It was censorship. Plus ça change, as Juncker might say. Now, tonight is crucial. This is not just any old Thursday debate at the Oxford Union. There was a moment in the past when what happened here had reverberations round the world. And that was when this House decided that it would not fight for king and country. And it gave immense comfort to a rather nasty regime. And tonight it is crucial that this House, this bastion of freedom, this renowned historical organisation that has always been devoted to free speech, does not tonight go the other way and make a decision in favour of censorship. What we are debating here tonight is crucial. Now, I speak with feeling. When I was growing up, it was in the immediate post-war period when people had lost sons, husbands, fathers to the Nazis. They'd lost limbs and faced a life of disability. They had lost homes. They had lost them to a vile regime called National Socialism. And yet, Oswald Mosley and Colin Jordan and other such charming souls were allowed in law to hold their rallies in this country. You think how much offence, how much hurt, how much insult that caused to people who had made such major sacrifices. But the devotion to free speech and the recognition that we had spent 6 years fighting for liberty led us to believe that it was preferable to have free speech than not to be offended. And then a few years later, when I was here, we were right at the height of the Cold War. And it's difficult to remember 30 years after the Berlin Wall came down. But we were actually at a stage when all along the borders of what were then the Warsaw Pact countries, the Soviet Union had stationed weapons pointing straight at us. And yet, you could still stand for Parliament as a communist. You probably wouldn't get in, but you could still stand. You could stand on street corners and sell the Morning Star. You could subscribe openly to the Communist Party. And I expect that gave a lot of offence, and that caused a lot of hurt, and probably also alarm. But we believed that free speech was more important. Now, only two sorts of people oppose free speech, and they are at opposite ends of the scale: snowflakes and totalitarians. Now, Celeste said there's nothing wrong with being a snowflake. No, you can be as snowflakish as you like, providing you don't try to impose that on other people. I am offended, upset, insulted at least 30 times a day. Tough. Celeste upset me. Celeste wounded me. Celeste has caused me trauma. She poured scorn on my Paso Doble. And does she realise that in 15 years' time, I am still going to be traumatised, and I am going to form a movement? Me Too dancers who were insulted in the Oxford Union. Oh, come on. Nobody has the right to live their lives being protected from offence or from insult or from hurt feelings. It is an occupational hazard of living in society. And if you really can't take it, become a hermit. But more seriously, on the opposite end from the snowflakes, poor little darlings, on the opposite end from them are the totalitarians. And that was how Hitler was so successful, because he did not allow any free speech whatever. And if you spoke out against that sickening regime, or indeed against the Soviet Union, 2 minutes more, no, I need at least 5, or spoke out in the Soviet Union, you would end up in prison, if not worse. Totalitarians like to curtail your right to disagree with state orthodoxy. Now, for state orthodoxy, substitute the words social orthodoxy. As exemplified by social media, Twitter, and other such places where people decide what is and what is not acceptable. Now, I would love to stand in this union and oppose and argue with and take to pieces a Holocaust denier. But if we say no, we can never have the Holocaust denier because his views are so offensive that he cannot be accorded a platform. Then what happens? That sort of viewpoint is driven underground where it can quite often flourish. And people whisper behind their hands, oh, you know, there's something in what he says, but we're not allowed to hear it. Let's hear it. And by hearing it, we can destroy it. We should also remember we should also remember that today's heresy can become tomorrow's credo. How fortunate we were that the Wilberforces of this world, the Pankhursts, the Martin Luther Kings, and everybody else who has over time and with massive effort changed society, how grateful we may be that they were not no platforms because it offended the society of their time. Now, I recently was asked if I objected to sharing a platform with somebody who had spoken in favour of, had not been involved in, but had spoken in favour of the IRA. Now, I lost a friend in the Brighton bomb. I missed the Brighton bomb by less than 20 minutes. And I looked at this person and I said, "So you wanted to blow me up?" And she said, "Well, I didn't want to do it myself." I do not object to sharing a platform and arguing with her, because by arguing with her, I can expose what is wrong. It is absolutely right that we should allow people, no matter how profoundly we disagree with them — I hate to utter cliches in this august debating hall, but I am going to utter one — that no matter how much we may disagree with somebody, we should defend to the hilt their right to say it. And that is something that I have believed all my life, that you succeed by defeating your opponent, not by wishing him away. You get nowhere by trying not to hear what is being said, not to hear the other arguments. As I said at the beginning, and I do passionately appeal to you tonight, this is not about which side wins. This is about whether the Oxford Union, of all bodies, will vote in favour of the diminution of free speech. Whether we will agree, and I say we because I'm a life member of this place, whether we will agree that somebody else may decide what we can and can't hear. And just remember this: you may feel virtuous today in what you will not hear, but tomorrow somebody may feel virtuous in not hearing what you have to say. Free speech is for all, not for the privileged few.
You know what's more destructive than a nuclear bomb? Words.